And I'll just tell you a little bit about each one of these things to give you sort of a flavor of what this book's about. And the way I want to talk about the people that I've come into contact with in doing this book, because it's such a gloomy topic. But the people that I've interviewed have really been what the source of my optimism, having come through this, because I am optimistic. I mean, I think that humans are an inventive species, and I think our problems are the problems of our own success, really. And I think that I just have, maybe it's a personality defect, but I have a basic optimism that we're going to invent our way out of these things. The first person I want to talk to you about is a guy named Yoshi Kawaoka. Yoshi Kawaoka is a virologist who came from Japan in the early 80s to do flu research here. And he came over on the plane, and it was a long plane ride, and so he needed something to read, and he was fascinated with Ebola, which is a very scary disease caused by a virus that fortunately doesn't spread very easily among humans. But if you do catch it, your chances are 9 out of 10, depending on the strain, of dying. And you die a very grisly death. I mean, this virus pretty much consumes your organs and turns everything into a mush. And so Yoshi Kawaoka was reading this book, and his English was getting better with every page. And then he landed in the middle of a bird flu epidemic in the United States. This was in 1983. And this was taking place in poultry farms in Pennsylvania. And it started out as a mild flu. And chickens, after all, can get the flu, and they get wheezy, and they get sick, and then they get better. But then it turned into a really particularly deadly strain that killed pretty much every chicken that caught it. And the farmers were panicking. The Department of Agriculture came in. And Kawaoka's job was to isolate the virus and test it. And he basically went into one of these labs where you have an airlock, and he had chickens in a cage, and he would infect the chickens with the virus, and then they would get sick, and then he would cut them open and see what happened. And what he found when he did these autopsies was that the virus had the same effect on the chickens that Ebola has on humans. And you can imagine the chill that ran down his spine when he realized this. And he thought that the question that he had then was, could there be a bird flu that jumps to humans that has this effect? In other words, that is so gruesomely efficient at killing people, and yet able to sweep from one end of the globe to the other in a matter of days or weeks. And that's pretty much defined his life's work since then. And he has recently been in the news. He's published some very controversial papers about bird flu. And he's trying to get to the bottom of what makes influenza work, and what makes it deadly, and how we can take measures against it. The other person I want to tell you about was a guy named Martin Scheffer. Martin Scheffer is he's the son of hippies. He's Dutch, and his parents were hippies. And his aunt was a belly dancer, and his parents were musicians. And but his great grandfather was a botanist, and Martin must have had the botany gene, because he rebelled against his rebellious parents and went into science, and he studied biology. And he grew up in Holland, swimming in all the dikes and the canals and the ponds, and he grew up with a love of waters and lakes. And the first job he had was working for the Dutch Ministry of Water, basically. And they were having a problem that these ponds would be clear, and they would be beautiful, clear water, beautiful fish, flowers growing in the pond, and then all of a sudden they would turn dark, and the fish would die except for the bottom feeders, and then the algae would grow on the surface and the plants would die. And the kids would come along to these watering holes and they would jump in and swim and come out covered with green. And so they said to Martin, you know, to solve this problem. And they knew what was causing it. They knew that what made the ponds switch to this turbid condition was fertilizer runoff. But the problem was, even when you stop the runoff, even when you eliminate the cause, you can't get the pond to go back to its previous state. And Martin, fortunately, had an expertise in a branch of mathematics called dynamical systems, which describes just such a thing. And the concept is simple. You know, you have a pond that's clear, and then it goes to a state of being turbid, and you can't get it to go back the same way it went in the first place. You have to find some other way, and it's like rolling a boulder off of a cliff. So you roll the boulder off the cliff and it gets to the bottom. You can't roll it back up. You've got to find some other way to get it to the top. Put it in a pickup truck and drive it around or something. So Martin figured out a way to get these ponds to go back to being clear. And this was this huge success. It was like a real world success. And he and his team started with this little pond, and then they went to a lake, and then they went all around Holland getting these things. And they were like miracle workers. What does this have to do with the end of the world? Well, I'll tell you. Martin and a bunch of other scientists are now looking into the climate systems and how they may be a lot like these ponds. They may have a propensity to flip from one state to the other. And we're talking about things like, we're not talking about global climate. We're talking about things like the Indian monsoons, for example. The monsoons could be here one year, and then the next year they could stop. They could just completely stop. They could flip to another state where they had a different pattern. They didn't dump as much rainfall, and you know, this kind of thing brings climate really into sort of the immediate future, because the idea that the Indian monsoon could go away and you couldn't get it back is, there are 1 billion people who rely on these rains every year for water, for agriculture. And then there's also there are many other climate systems like Gulf Stream, there's the Amazon rainforest and the system that supports that, El Nino, ice caps on the poles. And these systems could be interrelated. So if one flips, another could flip, and then you could have global catastrophe in short order. So you'll see I'm a really optimistic and nice guy, good guy to have at a cocktail party. You know? But the thing that gives me hope about this is that, you know, and as I'm talking to people about this stuff, you realize this is, to figure this out is really incredible. I mean, to get this kind of insight into how nature behaves is really what gives me hope that we're going to find a way to prevent this from happening. Now, the third and final person I want to tell you about is a guy named Scott Borg. Scott Borg is an economist, and he, back in the days before 9/11, when we all we had to worry about was Y2K. Remember that? That was great. The end of the world, Y2K. And a lot of computer scientists and economists were trying to figure out, when we get all these computers and we put them in all our institutions, what value are we creating by doing this? And how can we measure it? And so there was a lot of work done in value creation. Then 9/11 came, and Scott Borg had this idea that he would look into value destruction. How do you measure value destruction? Everybody's talking about value creation, but what about value destruction? And here you have, at 9/11 was a clear example of destruction. So he started to look into this, and that led him to the whole issue of computer viruses and the internet and that vulnerability. And I don't know if you've heard of something called Stuxnet. But Stuxnet was a computer program, a small one that could fit on a thumb drive, and it was designed by the U.S. Military, and it was sent out to seek and destroy one type of machine in one nation, in one lab, in one nation, and that lab was Natanz in Iran. And that machine was a centrifuge that is essential for their nuclear weapons program. And this is just it's a motor. It's a centrifuge. It spins and it purifies uranium. And this computer, this virus, made its way to these machines, and it destroyed them in a way that happened while engineers were watching. So this thing was deceptive. It told the engineers these machines are operating fine, and suddenly smoke is coming out of them and the thing, you know. And now what's interesting is that physically there's not a lot of difference between a centrifuge and a power generator. So they're both kinds of motors, you know. Centrifuge will consume electricity, a power generator will generate electricity. And you can imagine a Stuxnet-like virus infecting power plants, power generators throughout the United States. And there aren't that many of them. They're in the hundreds. And you can imagine a day that comes where suddenly all these things just blow up and the power goes out and we're all plunged into darkness. And you think, well, big deal, you know, we'll just burn some candles. But if you think about how few power generators are manufactured these days, and how these machines will last 40, 50 years, so you don't have to build that many. There's no capacity to build them in the United States. They're all built abroad. So if you had this kind of situation, you couldn't. It would take months or years to bring all these systems back. So you'd have a country. Imagine being without power for a year, the entire country or some large swath of the country, and you know, you'd have people who couldn't get food and people couldn't get water, and it would be a humanitarian disaster on par with a nuclear holocaust. So these are the kinds of vulnerabilities that we have, the thing that strikes me is that humans. What's amazing is that humans have managed to buck the system this far, and you know, I'm not making any predictions. You know, we're really sort of sitting around a campfire here, and we're telling scary stories, stories that are plausible, but you know, these are not things that I'm saying are going to happen, but could happen. And I think that it's important to do this because I think that in order to understand what we're up against, you know, in order to do something about it, you have to really understand what it is, and you have to understand the extent of it. And I think what it says to me is that we have to be very careful not to we need all the good ideas that we can get in each one of these areas. And we need to be open to good ideas. And I think we shouldn't be closed-minded about turning our minds against one problem or another, one solution or another solution. Unless we have very good reasons, we have to be very rational about it. And that's pretty much it. And there's so many really nice faces here. I'm really pleased that you've come out, and I want to thank you. And I'd love to answer whatever questions you have and sign some books. Thank you. Questions? Did I really bum you out? I hope I didn't, because you know I really mean what I say when I say that doing this book really gave me optimism, because I think when you fear something and you try not to think about it, you know it's worse in your imagination, And when you pay attention to something, when you look at something, and you realize that there are ways out, that there are really smart people out there who are thinking about these things, it's kind of reassuring.